All right, so, for anyone out there who loves a good philosophy puzzle, this deep dive is for you. We're going to be tackling scientific realism,
Ah, yes.
which basically asks, does science just give us handy tools and predictions? Or does it actually unveil the truth about reality, even the parts we can't directly see?
Right, it's like, can science really pull back the curtain and show us the machinery at work, even if we can't see those gears and levers directly?
It really makes you think about how we see science and its connection to the world, right?
It does.
And for this deep dive, we'll be using excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, specifically their entry on scientific realism.
Sounds good.
So we'll be putting on our philosopher hats for this one.
Excellent. It's a rich topic. Even pinning down what scientific realism is can be tricky.
Right.
I mean, imagine a spectrum.
Okay.
At one end, you have things we can observe directly, like a tree or a cat. Those are our observable entities.
Makes sense.
But then, on the other end, you have things like quarks or black holes, things we can't directly observe.
Yeah, it's like the difference between seeing a tree in your backyard and trying to wrap your head around the tiny particles that make up that tree. Stuff we can't see with our eyes, but we figure out through experiments and models.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that the line between observable and unobservable can shift as technology gets better.
Oh, that's a good point.
Things that were once unobservable, like viruses we can now see with microscopes, really shows how scientific observation isn't static.
It really makes you wonder what we might be able to observe in the future with even more advanced technology.
Which it does.
So how do we actually define scientific realism in a way that captures all this nuance, especially for a philosopher who loves to get into the nitty-gritty of definitions?
Well, there are two main approaches, both quite relevant to a philosophical mind.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first looks at the achievements of science. Like, have our best scientific theories actually managed to describe the world as it is, including the stuff we can observe? The second focuses on the aims of science. What's the ultimate goal? Uncovering truth or just being practically useful?
So it's like asking, did we map the human genome versus was the Human Genome Project mainly about developing new medical tech?
Exactly.
Both are important, but they lead to different ways of evaluating science's success.
They do. And when we really unpack scientific realism, we find it has three dimensions that are sure to resonate with a philosopher: metaphysical, semantic, and epistemological.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with metaphysical, what does that tell us about a scientific realist's view of the world?
Well, the metaphysical side of it says that the world exists independently of our minds. It's not just something we're imagining or creating through our social interactions.
So a scientific realist would say, even if every human suddenly vanished, the universe would just keep on going, with its laws of physics, galaxies, black holes, all that, whether we're here to see it or not.
Exactly. It's a commitment to a mind-independent reality, a foundational idea for doing science at all. Then we have the semantic dimension. Scientific realists take scientific statements literally. They believe that statements about the world, even those referring to unobservable entities, have a definite truth value. They're either true or false.
So it's not just a game of words or helpful fictions then.
Right.
A scientific realist would say we're actually trying to describe those quarks and black holes
Right.
to figure out if what we're saying about them matches how things actually are, even if we can't see them directly.
Precisely. And lastly, there's the epistemological dimension, where things get really interesting for a philosopher who's all about knowledge. Scientific realists believe science can give us genuine knowledge about the world, including those invisible parts.
So it's not just blind faith or taking a scientist's word for it then. It's the belief that the scientific method, with its emphasis on observation, experimentation, and reasoning, can actually lead us to trustworthy knowledge about the hidden workings of the universe.
Exactly. Though it's important to note that being a scientific realist doesn't mean you believe every single scientific claim is true.
Right, of course.
Science is always evolving, and even our best theories are likely to be revised as new evidence comes in.
It's not about clinging to specific theories then.
No.
It's more about the idea that science, as a process, can give us more and more accurate knowledge about the world, even if that knowledge is always open to being updated and refined.
Right.
So let's dive into some of the arguments that have really captured philosophers' attention. What makes scientific realism so compelling to some people?
Well, one of the strongest arguments, and one that's hotly debated in philosophy, is the miracle argument.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It starts with the observation that science has been incredibly successful at explaining and predicting all sorts of things, often with amazing accuracy.
Yeah, think about how we can predict eclipses down to the second or send a spacecraft to a precise spot on Mars.
Right.
It's incredible how well our scientific models line up with what actually happens in the universe.
It is. And the miracle argument suggests that this level of success would be a total fluke, a complete miracle, if our best scientific theories weren't at least approximately true.
It's like throwing darts at a board blindfolded
Yeah.
and somehow hitting the bullseye every time.
Exactly.
It makes you think, if our theories weren't tapping into some real truth about how things work, how could they be so effective?
Right. Would it just be a series of incredibly lucky guesses?
Yeah.
Their argument is that it's way more reasonable to believe that our scientific theories are actually latching onto something real, that they're reflecting genuine features of the world, even if those features involve things we can't observe, like quarks or black holes.
I can see the appeal of that argument, especially to someone who loves philosophy. It's like saying the power of science to explain and predict points to a deeper truth beyond just what we can see and model.
Exactly. Now, another argument that supports scientific realism, often discussed in philosophy of science, is the idea of corroboration.
Okay, I have a feeling this one might get a little technical.
It can, yeah.
But walk me through it. How does corroboration help the case for scientific realism?
Sure. Corroboration basically means that when we can study something using several different scientific methods, methods that rely on different theoretical assumptions and different types of observations, and all those methods lead to the same conclusion, it really strengthens our confidence that what we're seeing is real.
It's like having multiple witnesses to a crime who all give independent accounts that back each other up.
Exactly.
The more independent sources of evidence we have, the more reliable our conclusion becomes.
Right. It's not just one perspective or one way of looking at things. It's a bunch of different inquiries all converging.
And when we apply that to scientific realism, it means that when different scientific methods based on different theoretical frameworks all point to the same unobservable thing, it gives us good reason to believe that thing is real and not just a made-up part of our theories.
That's the idea.
Can you give me a real-world example? I love seeing how this plays out in actual science.
Absolutely. Consider the discovery of the electron. It didn't come from just one experiment.
Right.
It emerged from different research paths using different methods, experiments with cathode rays, studies of the photoelectric effect, even investigations into radioactivity.
Yeah.
And all these different approaches with their different theoretical foundations pointed to the existence of this tiny, negatively charged particle, the electron.
So it becomes much harder to dismiss the electron as just a theoretical concept when we have all this converging evidence from different scientific fields all supporting its existence.
Right. It's like a puzzle where different pieces from different boxes all fit together to make a coherent picture.
I like that.
And that's the power of corroboration. It makes our realist intuitions stronger, especially when dealing with those tricky, unobservable things. It supports the idea that our scientific theories aren't just random ideas. They're grounded in a reality that we're gradually revealing through different lenses and approaches.
That's fascinating.
It does. Now, even within scientific realism itself, there's this ongoing discussion about exactly which parts of science we should be realists about. Philosophers sometimes call this selective realism or selective skepticism.
Oh, interesting. So it's not like a blanket endorsement of everything science says then.
Right.
We need to be a bit more discerning, especially when we're talking about the unobservable worlds.
Exactly.
This sounds right up a philosopher's alley. Always questioning, always refining those ideas.
It is.
So what are some of the approaches within selective realism?
Well, there are three main camps, each with a different lens for focusing our realist commitments.
Okay.
The first is explanationism. This view says we should really zero in on the parts of scientific theories that are crucial for explaining why those theories work so well.
It's like saying, okay, if this theory can predict the movement of planets with incredible accuracy, let's be realists about the core principles that make those predictions possible.
Right.
Like the laws of gravity, the concept of planetary orbits. We're not necessarily buying into every little detail or every hypothetical entity, just the parts that do the heavy lifting when it comes to explaining things.
That's a great way to put it. It's about identifying the explanatory core of a theory and being realists about those elements.
I like it.
Then there's entity realism. This view argues that we should believe in the existence of something when we can manipulate it and use it to cause other effects.
So it's not just passively observing something then.
Yeah.
It's about actively interacting with it, using it as a tool to make specific things happen. This feels very hands-on, very experimental.
Exactly. Entity realism is tied to the idea of causal knowledge.
Yeah.
If we can use our understanding of something to reliably create certain effects,
Right.
like using electrons to power our devices or manipulating genes to create new traits in organisms, that's a strong argument for the reality of that thing.
It's like saying, if I can use this concept to build a working machine or develop a life-saving treatment, it's probably more than just a theoretical idea. It's got to be connected to reality somehow.
Exactly. And finally, we have structural realism. This view is a bit more nuanced. Structural realists are skeptical about the specific nature of unobservable entities, but they believe we can be realists about the relationships between those entities, the structure of the unobservable world.
So we might not be able to say for sure what an electron is in some ultimate sense, but we can be confident about how it interacts with other particles, its role in the electromagnetic field, its place within the overall structure of the atom.
Precisely.
It's about the connections, the patterns, the network of relationships.
Exactly. And within structural realism, there are actually two versions, epistemic and ontic.
Okay.
The epistemic version stresses that we can know about this underlying structure even if we're unsure about the exact nature of the entities themselves.
Makes sense.
The ontic version goes even further, suggesting that maybe entities are ultimately defined by their relations, that their structure is their essence.
Wow. That's a pretty mind-bending concept. It really challenges how we usually think about objects as independent things with inherent properties.
It does.
It's like saying the essence of a chess piece isn't its shape or what it's made of, but its role in the game, how it relates to other pieces, the rules that govern its movement.
That's a good analogy. It's a thought-provoking idea that has fueled a lot of debate in philosophy of science. Now, even though these selective realist positions provide a more nuanced way to approach scientific realism, they still face scrutiny from its critics.
Of course.
There are some compelling counter-arguments that any philosopher has to grapple with.
Okay, let's bring on those philosophical sparring partners.
Yeah.
What are some of the main challenges to scientific realism, even the more selective versions?
Well, one of the most enduring challenges is the underdetermination of theory by data. It's something that has puzzled philosophers of science for ages.
All right, I'm all ears. What makes underdetermination so tricky?
It's the problem that sometimes multiple different theories, with different ideas about unobservable things, can all explain the same set of observations.
Huh.
Imagine two different maps that both perfectly guide you through the same city,
Okay.
but they show different underground tunnel systems that you can't actually access. How do you know which map got the tunnels right?
That's a great analogy. It really highlights the challenge of knowing which theory is truly reflecting reality when multiple theories fit the data we have.
It does.
It's like trying to solve a crime with multiple suspects who all have believable motives. The evidence alone might not be enough to definitively say who did it.
Exactly. And this gets especially tricky when we're dealing with things we can't observe.
Right.
If two theories agree on everything we can see but disagree about the unobservable aspects, how do we choose between them?
Seems like we'd be stuck in a philosophical deadlock, unable to figure out which theory is giving us the real picture of those hidden parts of the world.
That's the heart of the problem. This argument from underdetermination often goes hand in hand with the Duhem Quine thesis, which argues that you can't really test scientific ideas in isolation. They're always embedded in a whole web of background assumptions, auxiliary hypotheses, and theoretical frameworks. So if an experiment doesn't match our predictions, it's tough to know exactly which part of this complex web is wrong.
It's like a recipe that goes wrong could be the oven temperature, a measuring mistake, the quality of the ingredients, even a misunderstanding of the instructions.
Right.
Trying to isolate the problem can be a real headache.
Exactly. And when we're dealing with unobservable entities, this interconnectedness of scientific claims makes it even harder to figure out which parts of our theoretical framework are being challenged by a specific observation. So the underdetermination argument throws a wrench into the realists' claim that our best theories give us knowledge about the unobservable world.
Yeah, I see that.
Because if many theories can fit the data, how can we be sure any one of them is truly revealing the underlying reality?
It's a strong challenge, and one that realists have been wrestling with for a while.
They have.
But I imagine they have some responses up their sleeves. How do they try to tackle this underdetermination problem?
Well, one common response, one that's often debated in philosophy of science, is to appeal to inference to the best explanation.
Okay, I've come across that term before. It sounds like a way to break the tie when multiple theories can explain the data.
Right.
It's like saying, sure, we have a few suspects, but this one has a much stronger and more convincing story that explains all the evidence.
That's the general idea, but as you might expect, it has its own set of problems. Firstly, how do we decide which explanation is best?
Right, good question.
Philosophers have suggested criteria like simplicity, coherence, explanatory scope, fruitfulness, but these can be hard to define and use consistently. What one person finds beautifully simple, another might think is oversimplify or lacking in depth.
It does seem like there's some subjectivity involved in those judgments. And even if we could agree on the criteria, wouldn't it still be a bit of a leap to assume that the best explanation we've thought of is actually the true one?
It would.
We might just be picking the best of a bad bunch, as some philosophers have put it.
Exactly. That's the second challenge. Even if a theory is the best explanation we found so far, it doesn't guarantee it's the real explanation or that it perfectly describes the unobservable realm.
Right.
We might be missing a vital clue, a completely different theoretical framework that we haven't even considered yet.
So while inference to the best explanation might be tempting for resolving the underdetermination issue, it's not a foolproof method. It comes with its own philosophical baggage.
It does, and this brings us to another powerful argument against scientific realism, the pessimistic induction.
Ooh, okay.
This argument looks at things from a historical perspective, and it can be a little unsettling.
I'm always up for some philosophical discomfort. Tell me, what's so pessimistic about this induction?
Well, it begins with the observation that many successful scientific theories from the past have turned out to be wrong from where we stand now. Think about the Ptolemaic model of the universe, with Earth at the center, or the phlogiston theory of combustion.
Right, those theories have been filed away in the history books. They're interesting relics of how science used to understand the world, but not reflections of how things actually are.
Exactly. And the pessimistic induction takes this historical trend and says, look, if so many successful theories in the past have been replaced and considered false, isn't it probable that our current theories, even our best ones, will also be overturned and deemed false in the future?
It does make you wonder, what parts of our current understanding will future generations find laughably incorrect?
That's the pessimistic sting. It challenges the idea that scientific progress is a straight line towards truth. If even our most successful theories are potentially wrong, how much can we really trust their ability to reveal the true nature of reality, especially those parts we can't observe?
It really makes you confront the limitations of what we know, and the possibility that even our most cherished scientific beliefs might one day be discarded. How do scientific realists respond to this seemingly never-ending cycle of theories being proven wrong?
They have a few tactics. One approach is to focus on mature and non-ad hoc theories.
Yeah.
They argue that the pessimistic induction overreacts because it lumps together all kinds of theories, including those that were speculative, underdeveloped, or designed just to patch up holes in existing knowledge, what philosophers call ad hoc hypotheses.
So it's like comparing apples and oranges. We shouldn't judge all scientific theories based on the ones that weren't fully formed or were hastily put together.
Exactly. If we concentrate on theories that have survived rigorous testing, multiple attempts to disprove them, and haven't been twisted to accommodate every new observation, those mature, well-supported theories might paint a less gloomy picture.
Like saying, let's judge the legal system based on its most carefully considered verdicts, not on cases that were rushed or based on weak evidence.
A good analogy. Another realist response leans on the idea of selective realism we discussed earlier.
Right.
They admit that past theories were wrong in many details, but they argue that there's still continuity in terms of the really crucial explanatory aspects, the entities we can manipulate, or the structural relationships those theories captured.
So even if we got some things wrong about the nature of light, we were still on the right track about its wave-like properties or its role in photosynthesis.
Right.
The core insights remain, even if some details need updating.
Precisely. They argue that the pessimistic induction focuses too much on the literal truth of every single claim, while ignoring the deeper, more enduring aspects of scientific understanding that have survived through changes in theories.
It's about recognizing that scientific knowledge isn't just a bunch of isolated facts.
No.
It's a network of interconnected ideas. And even if some connections in that network are broken or rewoven, the overall structure can still hold firm.
Exactly. Now, another challenge to scientific realism, one that often pops up in philosophical discussions, is the notion of approximate truth.
Right. Because even realists accept that our theories probably aren't completely 100% true.
Yes.
Science is always refining and revising itself.
Yes.
It is. But if realists simply say, well, our theories are true enough, it feels a bit like they're dodging the issue.
Yeah.
What does true enough actually mean?
That's the core of the matter. Anti-realists often criticize the idea of approximate truth as being too vague, even meaningless.
Right.
They ask, how can a theory be close to the truth if it's not entirely true?
Yeah.
What are we measuring this closeness with? What's the benchmark?
It's a valid question. If we're saying our scientific theories are approximately true, we need a way to understand that approximation, to give it some philosophical weight.
We do. So realists have tried to explain what they mean by approximate truth, and their answers often spark intense philosophical debate.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into the depths of approximate truth. How have realists tried to define this elusive concept?
There have been some attempts using mathematical tools, often borrowing concepts from logic and model theory.
Oh, bringing in the big guns. That sounds interesting, but maybe a bit abstract, too.
It can be. One approach uses this idea of verisimilitude, which basically tries to compare the true and false consequences of different theories.
So the theory that has more true implications and fewer false ones is closer to the truth, then. Kind of like a truth-to-falsehood ratio.
Yeah, that's the gist of it, but it has run into some snags when people try to define it super rigorously. Another approach uses the framework of possible worlds. Like imagine all the different ways the world could be.
Okay, I'm game for some philosophical world hopping. How do these possible worlds help us with approximate truth?
The idea is to think of a theory's truth conditions as like the set of possible worlds where it would be true.
Okay.
Then you can use a mathematical function to calculate the distance between the actual world and those possible worlds where the theory holds up.
So the closer those possible worlds are to our real world, the more truth-like the theory is then. Like, if our world is a point on a map, and a theory's truth conditions are a circle on that map, the smaller the circle, the closer it is to actually pinpointing our world.
That's a good way to picture it. There's also an approach using what's called type hierarchies. It's where you represent scientific concepts and the things they describe in a kind of tree-like structure, and you measure similarity based on where they are in this hierarchy.
So concepts that are closer in this hierarchy are more similar then.
Right.
And theories that connect concepts in a way that closely mirrors the actual relationships between things in the world are considered more approximately true. Like, if we have a hierarchy of animals, a theory that correctly distinguishes mammals from reptiles is closer to the truth than one that just lumps them all together.
Exactly. Now, alongside these formal approaches, there are also more, I guess you could say, intuitive ways to think about approximate truth, which a philosopher might find more familiar.
Okay, let's bring it back down to earth. What are some of these more intuitive ways of understanding approximate truth?
One common idea is to look for what are called limiting cases, where a newer theory can be shown to basically reduce to an older theory under specific conditions.
Ah, like how Einstein's theory of relativity kind of boils down to Newton's laws of motion at normal, everyday speeds. The newer theory includes the older one, but also expands our understanding to a wider range of situations.
Precisely. It suggests there's a kind of continuity in how science progresses.
Right.
The new theory isn't totally tossing out the old one. It's refining it, expanding it, which suggests we're getting closer to a more accurate view of reality.
Like creating a more detailed map, adding more layers of information, but still recognizing the landmarks and routes that were already there on the previous map.
Exactly. Another way to look at it focuses on the general correspondence principle, which suggests that successful theories tend to hold on to the parts of earlier theories that worked well, even as they introduce new concepts and explanations.
So it's not just a random mess of constantly changing ideas then.
Right.
There's a cumulative element to scientific knowledge, where we build upon the insights of the past, even as we revise and refine what we know.
Exactly. It's like adding new rooms to a house while still preserving the foundation and structure of the original building.
Okay, I'm seeing how these different approaches to approximate truth try to address those anti-realist criticisms, providing ways to make sense of the idea that our theories can be close to the truth, even if they're not perfect in every way.
They do. And it's important to keep in mind that these discussions about approximate truth are still very much alive in philosophy of science. There isn't one universally accepted definition or framework.
Of course, it wouldn't be philosophy if everyone just agreed and called it a day. This deep dive has been a real journey through the philosophical landscape of scientific realism. We've explored its main ideas, its pros and cons, its supporters and detractors, even some alternative paths that try to move beyond the whole debate altogether. So where do you stand on this complex and fascinating issue?
It is a fascinating one.
Do you lean towards the realist side, believing that science can uncover the universe's hidden truths? Or do the anti-realist critiques make you question the boundaries of what science can really know? Maybe you find comfort in one of those alternative viewpoints, looking for a way past the polarization. Wherever you fall, remember that the process of philosophical inquiry is just as important as any answer you might find. By wrestling with these questions, exploring different perspectives, challenging our own assumptions, we broaden our intellectual horizons and deepen our understanding of knowledge, truth, and our human quest to make sense of the world.
Well said. It's a quest that never truly ends, does it?
It doesn't. So keep those philosophical gears turning. Explore those ethical implications of believing in things science tells us about but that we can't observe. Think about how different cultural perspectives might shape our views on scientific realism. This deep dive has just scratched the surface of a vast and ever-changing philosophical landscape.
Indeed it has. The exploration continues.